Today, on the Scouting for Growth podcast, we are joined by a true innovator in the fight against one of the most urgent climate threats facing our communities, wildfire. Laurna Castillo is the Senior Vice President of Products at CSAA Insurance Group, a AAA insurer serving millions of customers across the western United States. Laurna has become a leading voice in reimagining how the insurance industry and entire communities can build resilience in the face of escalating wildfire risk. To put the challenge in perspective, in California alone, wildfires have destroyed over 40,000 structures and claimed hundreds of lives in the past decade. In 2023, the state saw more than 7,000 wildfires, burning nearly 320,000 acres. Nationwide, wildfire seasons are now 78 days longer than they were in 1970s, and the risk is only growing as climate change intensifies drought and heat. But Laurna and her team at CSAA are proving that resilience is possible. Rather than just seeing wildfire as an insurance problem, Laurna reframed it as a home's burning down problem, a shift that has driven CSAA to pioneer new approaches. Under her leadership, CSAA launched some of the first wildfire mitigation discounts in the industry, and more recently, community-driven pilots in high-risk counties like Sonoma and Butte. These programs go beyond financial incentives, using behavioral science, education, and partnership with local organizations to help homeowners take meaningful actions. Laurna's work is showing that resilience isn't just about rebuilding after disaster. It is about preventing loss in the first place and empowering every stakeholder, from insurers to contractors to homeowners, to play a role. Her approach is helping to redefine what it means to be prepared in a world where wildfires are no longer a rare event, but a recurring reality. So please join me in welcoming Laurna Castillo to the show as we explore how innovation, collaboration, and a new mindset can help us all scout for growth, even in the face of wildfire. Hi, Laurna. Thank you so much for joining me on Scouting for Growth.
Hi, thank you so much for having me today.
Well, it's a pleasure to see you again. I was so impressed by your conversation, your presentation when we were both at the Future of Insurance with Reuters. And I want the world to know about what you talked about then, Laurna. So before we dive into our wildfire resilience conversation, can you tell us a bit more about you, your background, and what motivated you to work in this space in the first place?
Yeah, so I have been in the insurance industry for almost 2 decades now. I actually started out in the actuarial space, but very quickly realized that I wanted to be not just kind of behind the computer looking at the data, but out in front of solutions. And so I came over to our product management department here at CSAA. We're a AAA branded insurer, pretty early in my career. And it's really provided me with the opportunity to really lean into solutions and be on the forefront, especially in California, where there's so much going on right now. And we're headquartered in California. I live in California. And there's just so much going on in the insurance space. So it was much more exciting for me to be on the business side of things.
So, Laurna, I hope you don't mind the question. You are at CSAA in California, but I can hear an accent. And I have an accent myself, but I thought I will just clarify the accent as well.
Yeah. So I was born in Liverpool, England, but I moved over here to the US in high school. So I was 14, I was a freshman. in high school when I moved over here. And straight to California, and I've been here ever since. But can't shake the Scouse accent. It's still following me through.
Nice. And I'm sure a lot of people say it's charming, actually.
Thank you.
So let's dive into how we are going to rethink wildfire risk and resilience. And I want to ask you now, what led you and CSAA to reframe the wildfire in the way you've done, right? With homes burning down problem statement you made when we met, rather than just focusing on the insurance issue as we know it today.
Yeah, well, it's actually part of our legacy as a AAA company to help members and consumers in general live their lives with greater safety. If you think about kind of our history as AAA, we were originally an automobile association, and we really focused on making cars safer. And we were actually one of the first advocates for things like seatbelts. And if you think about, if we didn't have seatbelts today, car insurance would be significantly more expensive, making driving less accessible to your average person. And so it's exactly the same thing with wildfire, right? We have massive quantities of homes that are being lost to these fires every year. And if we don't have these solutions to have less homes burn down and be affected by wildfire, we're going to end up with inaccessible it's going to be inaccessible for your average consumer to be able to even live in California, just given the cost of insurance. So, leaning into that kind of homes burning down problem, getting less homes burning down, the societal good, that's actually good for insurance in the long run too. It makes it more affordable and accessible for your average consumer.
Absolutely. And we've seen that as well with motor here in Europe, in London, with telematics. Young people could not get acceptable priced insurance products. And so telematics came about. And we have seen now, premiums which were in the thousands gone down to something which is much more affordable for a young
Yeah.
driver. So absolutely understand the concept. So how did this shift in perspective influence the strategies, right? Within your department, within CSAA, and to delivering and building this wildfire resilience solution that you were talking about when we met?
Yeah, so it was a gradual shift for us, just like any big change in thinking about running a business. The first thing we had to do was put away the old playbooks, right? This wasn't just something you could price your way out of, right? We don't just lean into the actuarial science and try to get rate and kind of go through the old strategies. So putting away that old playbook was really the first biggest step in that shift. And that's something that's not really easy, especially in the insurance industry, which is generally a little bit more slow moving than some other industries. But once we got past that, it's a matter of kind of marrying doing the right thing today, which might not have immediate returns, with this long-term future vision. So constantly for every decision, reminding ourselves, this is the long-term vision. We're making progress. It might not feel like it in any single decision in any single day, but there is progress if you look at it long term. So that was really the shift in perspective we needed, and it's really a culture change across our organization.
Yeah, no, I can see that, and I've met some of your colleagues. A few people I adore, absolutely adore, actually. And what I can see, it's a company which value people, which value transformation, and also make sure that culture alongside transformation. When I look, for example, a new technology coming into the market, feel comfortable with the change. And you need this, right, to actually embed change within organization, but also impact the customer you are trying to impact every day. But I want to talk about challenges now, Lorna. When you look at what you do every day, what is the biggest challenges you are facing or you have faced in moving from risk transfer, right, to this risk prevention model you are describing right now?
Yeah, the biggest challenge was really knowing where to start. If you think about the concept of wildfire, right, we can't start by trying to necessarily prevent wildfires. Wildfires are going to happen. But then if you go to kind of okay, so if wildfires are going to happen, how do we prevent protect communities and homes. And it's just a huge issue across many different people. And just knowing where to start, especially as an insurance company, right? Insurance companies generally are there after an event has happened. So we don't necessarily have a go-to guide on how to lean into this. So that kind of like, what do we do day one was one of our biggest challenges. Um, Fortunately, as I mentioned, it's kind of in our DNA as a AAA company, right? We did this before with seatbelts. Took quite a while for seatbelts to actually, catch on, both in like manufacturing vehicles as well as people actually using them. And it's going to be something, I think, with wildfire resilience within each property. So we um, we just chose somewhere to start, right? And then go from there. It's like do the next best right thing that's in front of you. And if you keep doing that, eventually it builds up into a system of change and collective progress, right? And oftentimes when you start this journey, it's that step one. But then the road kind of starts to show itself as you go along this journey. So for us, it was not just thinking about investing in individual property mitigation, it's also things like investing in forest resilience, right? Making sure that we have healthy forests that can live with wildfire without it getting out of hand. There's also the behavioral sciences aspect of it, like how do we might know how to make a house resilient to wildfire, but how do we get people to affect change? So um, the journey has been difficult. Again, knowing where to start was probably our biggest challenge, but just making sure that you stick to it and just recognize all of the different facets that needs progress in and lean in when you recognize those.
Being one key statement you made is innovation is based on the community. So we are talking about community-driven innovation and behavioral change. So it takes time to change behaviors. And, having studied change management, it can take up to 7 years to get people to really get what you're trying to get them to do and get them to embed that in their everyday behavior. So you've done some pilots, and when we met, you talked about the pilots in Sonoma and Butte counties, which were focused on communities, right? Engaging communities in very different ways. So, what have you learned from those initiatives, and what motivated actually homeowners to change a little bit over time, I guess?
Yeah. So some of it has been a reinforcement of things that we kind of already knew, but we did also learn some new things. So one of the reinforcement items was just that people are overwhelmed and they're confused. Like there's so much information out there. You speak to your neighbor, you might get one thing. You speak to your local fire chief, you'll get another thing. You go onto the search engine, you'll get another thing. And so there's just so much information and it's confusing. And that's one thing that we really, really kind of we knew, but it was reinforced in our community engagements. Another big thing was that trusted voices matter. So people are most likely to trust the motivations of, again, I mentioned their neighbors and local fire chiefs and community leaders versus their insurance companies or, kind of more business driven in messaging. So it's really kind of that community level trusted voices. That was a really big learner for us. Financial support. It's not always cost effective. People don't necessarily have the money on hand in their budget to invest in wildfire resilience. And so financial support is a huge part of what we learned in these pilots to essentially say, okay, how can we get rebates, cost sharing mechanisms, and potentially grants and so on and so forth to help with the adoption rates. And then there's also a level of proof. It's it's a new concept for a lot of homeowners. And so it's not something where it's like, oh, I know this is going to work and I'm going to get immediate returns on it, right? There's a level of kind of trust that they're going into. So if they can see examples of where this has worked, that was another big thing that we learned from these pilots.
And amazing results. And, as you said, it takes time to convince and transform people. One thing I hear a lot today when we talk about resilience and driving wildfire or climate resilience in general is that public private partnership. So what roles do partnership plays within that framework? The contractors, the local government, the nonprofit. How do you leverage all the different members within that community to build a wildfire resilient community?
Yeah. Um, I cannot emphasize enough how important partnerships are to this problem. Partnerships extend reach, right? So many different, I guess, ways that we can influence and get into these communities. Some examples is, I think you mentioned HOAs, right? They can do a good job at setting standards. In fact, some HOAs have standards that directly conflict with the science for wildfire resilience, because oftentimes, trees and shrubbery, they're beautiful, and HOAs have historically focused on beautification of neighborhoods versus wildfire resilience. So getting them to change the mindset a little bit from that to setting standards where it's more of a communal good if in the event of a wildfire, that would be one really important partnership for us. And then you mentioned contractors as well. The easiest way to have a wildfire resilient home is to build one, right? Building one that's not resilient and then trying to retrofit it is less optimal and not as easy. So working with contractors, not only for new builds, but then also educating them on retrofits. That's also a huge way we can lean into partnerships. And then there's also an efficiency aspect of it too, right? So having that coordinated approach so that when the time comes, when it's right for the homeowner, that's when we can. So it's not at the time of, for example, insurance purchase. Maybe they're going through a remodel and we might just be able to say, hey, you're going to replace your roof anyway. Why not move from wood shingle to concrete, right? So having the right timing of making these changes is another way we can really lean into partnerships.
Yeah, I'm going to ask you this question, remembering as you are speaking these pictures of the wildfire in, California earlier this year. And I remember seeing that picture in your presentation where there was one single house which was protected and all the different house around it was completely burned. What were some of the strategies that single home had, which enabled it to still be alive, with no
Yeah.
issues at the end of the day?
Yeah, that was one example. That one was the Lahaina fire in Hawaii. But every single time we have one of these massive events, we see homes like this where it's the whole neighborhood burned down and we have individual structures. And you ask, like, well, why that house? Why not the next house next to it, right? And it's oftentimes they have already done the things that are needed to make that home resilient. Now, there's a lot of things that need to happen generally, but the single most important thing is clearing your flammable material in the 0 to 5 foot zone. So, not having fences move all the way up to your property, not having trees overhanging your roof or shrubbery against your window. Um, every single time when we see these homes that have survived and all the homes burnt around it, that 0 to 5 foot zone is clear. And then there's the other things, right? So having covered vents, making sure that you have non-flammable material, decks that don't have piles of leaves underneath, that kind of stuff. So it really takes all of those things to, have a high likelihood that yours will be that one house that survives. But oftentimes it's just, you did the 0 to 5 and you did a couple of other things, and that was enough for that specific situation to have that house, survive that extreme event.
Yeah, I know you've spent a lot of time with communities to really listen and really understand their wants and their needs and what triggers them. And so, have you, used behavioral insight and behavioral analysis to really understand the emotional attachment and the confusion people are actually experiencing over, retrofitting, changing stuff in their homes? And what shaped your approach to help them understand what they need to do?
Yeah. The first thing that is just essentially acknowledging those emotional barriers, right? This is not just a transaction where there's no emotion in it, right? Many homeowners have spent, decades, they've planted a tree and they've grown attached to the tree. Or maybe it's grandma's rose bushes that they have, been admiring and taking care of, their whole life. And so there's a lot of emotional barriers, and just acknowledging those up front, to me, was one of the kind of key things that shape our approach. And then I kind of always have this saying where it's like, rather than asking a question that sets up the answer no, let's give people something to say yes to, right? So instead of saying, hey, can you remove your grandma's butters? You're going to get a no, right? Instead, it's, hey, can we relocate them so that they're not as close to your property? And here's some of the options to have a beautiful, fire resilient landscape closer to your property. Well, that's a lot easier to say for people to say yes to.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And this is, communication strategies often, but also it's education. I hear there's a lot of education you have to do there. So can you share an example of, a surprising barriers to mitigation you also have experienced, an encounter when you actually talk to those communities, and how should we all learn how to address those?
Yeah, so one of the biggest surprises for me was just there was many homeowners who just believe that mitigation is ineffective, right? Or it would automatically lower their property value. So there was this kind of like distrust in it, despite there being obviously this huge issue for California properties and all these fires and examples of, you know, communities being effective. So there was this kind of disbelief that, hey, in this extreme event, there's nothing I can do. So in response to that, we actually partnered with IBHS. It's the Insurance Institute of Business and Home Safety. And they've been a really great partner for us in being able to demonstrate the effectiveness of these mitigation items. For some people, it's just data, right? You show the data and that helps with trust. For others, it's showing them pictures of the examples, like that one house in my presentation that showed that single home that survived the Lahaina fire. And so just kind of leaning in and making sure that we can get that level of trust, which will help people believe that, hey, this investment is something that will be effective for their property.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's talk about the future of resilience, because actually we are in times of learning as to how we become more resilient, whether it's talking to our communities, but also as insurance carriers. And I remember you saying that resilience is not a product, it is a service, a mindset, and a public good. So how can our industry, how can insurers and other stakeholders within, you know, the community and the work we are doing every day adopt a different mindset?
Yeah, I think the first one is recognizing what resilience is. Historically, when people think in the insurance industry, what's resilience? It's, oh, the event happens, the home burnt down, now I can help that property owner financially recover. That's really not what resilience is as it relates to insurance industry's role in wildfires. It's earlier on, right, which is making sure that we have prevention and long-term community safety. So I think that, yeah, number one is literally just what is resilience and what is my role within resilience. And once you're there, it's a matter of kind of sticking with it, right? I mentioned earlier, this takes time, right? And it's a cultural change often. And so just making sure that you have that North Star, you have that strategic imperative that really should come from the top within companies. And you're not looking for immediate returns in every single decision you make. You're looking for that long-term vision. That mindset is really what's critical. So recognize resilience and then adopting it and staying the course. That would be my recommendation for other insurance companies and stakeholders to be able to adopt the mindset.
Yes, moving from maybe profit to purpose, looking
Mhm.
at the network, right? And looking at solving, as you said, the problem slightly differently by involving your partners as part of the equation. So looking at all the work you have done, and maybe Lorna, can you tell us how long have you been working on this problem? What are the lessons learned from you, we can learn to start really rethinking the way we'll do wildfire resilience. But I think a lot of the lesson learned we are going to get from you can be probably help us with other climate resilience issue, which we are also seeing in other parts of the world and of the United States.
Yeah, so I mean, we've been in this leaning into this problem with this mindset for over a decade, really longer. But it's really becoming more of a strategic focus and imperative for us, definitely in the past decades, where we've had this, increase in these really large fires that have affected a lot of properties. Um, and we've done a lot of different things across, right? So the first thing that I would recommend as probably maybe one of the most important issues is just kind of where to start in terms of mitigation. That 0 to 5 foot ignition zone, that's the single most important factor. So if you're going to do anything, try to influence in any way that critical zone of the 0 to 5 feet is step one. You heard me mention the seatbelt analogy earlier on. That's kind of like seatbelts, right? Where it's like, yeah, seatbelts, it's super important. And of course, we're going to do a lot of other things to help cars improve with safety. And that's the same thing for homes. 0 to 5 foot, if we can get that done, that's really, really a huge step in the right direction. And we should still think about, how we can continue to do more. And then I think that another important factor for the broader industry would be scalability, right? So aligning on common standards. I mentioned earlier, right? You can get a lot of different information, sometimes conflicting, from different people. And so if we can come together and give common standards and rally around the similar messages, that will help homeowners receive clear, consistent guidance and help them just know where to start.
Yeah, absolutely. Today, we are talking a lot about data, artificial intelligence, how to become AI first or data first enterprise. So what do you see the role of data segmentation? And you mentioned behavior, right, earlier. So behavioral science to really learn about wildfire, but also set the future of wildfire resilience efforts for within the organization.
Yeah, I think there's two really clear, effective ways we can use data in the future. The first one I think will be around personalization, and that kind of goes with behavioral science as well, right? So knowing that wildfire resilience is not a one size fits all in terms of both encouraging people to take action, but also what action is needed for that specific individual and what barriers do they have. It could be financial for one person, but it could be just education for another person, or maybe it's just the belief that those steps are something they should invest in. So using data to have like we can't know what's the true issue for every single person. That's not scalable, right? But you can start to develop common themes and make sure that the way you approach solutions are more tailored to what's likely the highest issue for that group of people. So I think data to offer segmentation to help us with behavioral science and being able to cater the messaging and the solutions for those segments. I think that that's going to be a huge way we can really leverage data in the future. And then the second big one is just the industry alignments, right? You heard me mention before that it's confusing if you're hearing different things, and maybe even just within the insurance industry, you might hear different things, right? You might go to carrier A for a quote, and they're like, "You got to clear your 0 to 5 feet." You might go to carrier B, and they're like, "You got to cover your events," right? And you're like, "Well, which is it? Like, what do we do?" And so using data to have consistent messaging across carriers, regulators, academia, I think that will accelerate adoption too. A recent example of this is the WUI, so that's the Wildlands Urban Interface. It's communities that interface with the wildlands. So the WUI Data Commons, which intends to compile information from different sources, public and private, and that'll tell different insurance companies areas that and properties that are well defended against wildfire, so that when you do go to company A or company B, they have the same access to the same data and they can give very clear, consistent feedback to individual property owners, or maybe, consistent ways that they're approaching pricing or underwriting and different ways that they're managing their products.
Yeah, no, it's very inspiring, Lorna. And so, can I ask you, do you come back to London every so often or to the UK?
Yeah, I do. My eldest sister still lives in Liverpool, and I'm actually out in London at least once a year, meeting with our reinsurance partners for work. So I get to go out there every May, but I also go out there and visit my sister and my nieces as much as I can.
Good, because we have excuses to actually see you hopefully in London, and maybe we can actually
Yes.
get you to come and talk to one of our European conferences as well. So, if the listeners want to find out a little bit more about what you are doing at CSAA, as part of AAAs, because we have our own version of AAAs as well here, and I'm sure people would want to learn from your experience. What should they do? Where should they go?
Yeah, so the first thing I always tell people is start with trusted guidance, right? So go to the IBHS Wildfire Prepared Home Program website. That's the same information in terms of how do you, um, you know, make your home resilient that you would get from us as an insurance company. So that's wildfirepreparedhome.org. That's a science-based checklist. For CSAA engagements, connecting with us through our initiatives and partnerships. I mentioned a couple of pilots, but we have so many different ways that we're interacting with the community. And you can find out more about those through our social media platforms, including Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram. And then lastly, just community action, right? Just getting into your communities, talking with your HOAs. You'll probably, if you start to get involved in those, you'll probably see me personally pop up a lot because I'm out there talking to many different people and, really trying to advance the purpose. So that's another really good way to get involved as well.
Yeah. So, Lorna, well, thank you so much for joining me on Scouting for Growth today. I can't wait to share this conversation and even turn it into an article because I think it is one of those stories so many people need to hear about. So, thank you for joining me. Really
Yeah.
grateful to having you
Thank you.
here.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
No pleasure. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Scouting for Growth. Please subscribe, share with friends, and leave a 5-star rating. Your rating is so valuable. I review all of them, and my team help me adapt content to meet your needs. Also, connect with me on my preferred channels. I am a B2B growth expert, so you will find me on LinkedIn, Instagram, and Threads, and X as well as Blue Sky. All information available below. Until next, keep scouting for growth.